And welcome to all the people who've come to Avid Reader. It's lovely to still be doing events, and we're back up to full capacity at Avid. If you got bumped from last week's event because of numbers, a few people did. Thank you very much for bearing with us and coming tonight. We did have to last minute cut our audience down because they cut our numbers down because of COVID. So luckily this week we're back to full capacity, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be able to stay there until whatever the opening update may be in the future. Just on that COVID note, once we finish the event tonight, if you go inside, you'll just need to wear your mask again, that's all. You can take your mask off while you're drinking in your seat, so that's absolutely fine as well. Great. Now, on that note, I'm going to introduce you to our intrepid MC tonight, who is doing this for the very first time. So be very, very kind to her. Sally McLeod is a GP, now working mainly in the mental health sector. She's also a mother of 3 boys. Unfortunately, she is a failed musician. I don't know if that's a very good term. Having abandoned piano lessons in her teenage years, it's never too late. But is living vicariously through her 12-year-old son, Liam, who's one of Ed's viola students. She feels enormously privileged to watch the magic unfold between teacher and student every Saturday afternoon. So everybody welcome Sally McLeod. Sally, thank you. Of course, we have Ed tonight, who is a writer, musician, broadcaster, born on the White Cliffs of Dover, and began playing music when he was six years old. He studied in Manchester, Berlin and London, played professionally in the UK and Hong Kong, and moved to Australia in 2003. Ed is the presenter of ABC Classic Weekend Breakfast. Ed has written 3 other books: Cadence, about his journey by bicycle from England to Hong Kong with only a violin for company; Danger Music, describing his year teaching music in Afghanistan; and Sonim and the Silence, a children's book about the importance of music. All 3 of those books should be at the counter as well. Ed's books have been shortlisted for several prestigious awards, including the Prime Minister's Literary Awards. We are very excited to be talking about Whole Notes, the new book, tonight. Everybody welcome Ed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here tonight, to be able to chat with you, Ed, about your new book. As Chrissy mentioned, I've known Ed for a couple of years now, mainly in his capacity as my son Liam's viola teacher. And I do just want to reinforce that disclosure. I have very scant musical knowledge. I don't play an instrument very well at all, but I am a listener of music and I am a reader of books. And I guess most importantly for tonight's conversation, I'm a witness to Ed's extraordinary talent as a music teacher and kind of a music ambassador as well. So I'm really glad to be here tonight to talk with you. I got to read Ed's book a couple of weeks ago, and I've got to say I read it in an afternoon. Like, it was really compelling and beautifully written, Ed, just so beautifully written. I think it's going to have like a really wide appeal. I think it's going to appeal to young music students who are needing some inspiration as they learn their craft. It's also going to appeal to parents of young children who are trying to work out how to give the gift of music to their child. It's going to appeal to older people who have a bit of time on their hands and are trying to work out, you know, how to go about learning an instrument again or starting one afresh. But I think most of all, it's going to appeal to people who just like Ed's really intimate conversational style, the way he writes and the sort of insights he has into life and music. So it's really fantastic. If you haven't read it already, I urge you to get a copy and read it as soon as possible. So let's get to the questions, Ed. Okay, so before Whole Notes, you've written a couple of books already. You've written Cadence and Danger Music for adults, and you've written Sonim and the Silence for children. All those books have as their central theme to the power of music to overcome life's difficulties. So you've written a lot about music before this book. What made you write this book?
My publisher, actually.
Sure.
Mary Rennie at HarperCollins came to me with an idea of putting together, so I write these little blog type things on the ABC Classic website called Ed's Notebook. And Mary said, what about we make a book out of the collection of these little blogs? So she took that to the commissioning people at HarperCollins, but they said no. And so Mary came back and said, well, let's see what we can do to sort of make this more substantial. So together we worked out this idea of having a book about how music can make our lives whole. So it's very much thanks to Mary that she absolutely instigated it. You know, I really think, I've never had children, but I understand that this writing a book may be like having a child, that it is so painful. It is in many ways not at all enjoyable. There are moments of great relief, and at the end of it, you swear you will never ever do it again. And here I am for the fourth time doing this again.
We're very glad that you did it. I want to ask you a question about, it's kind of like a books versus music kind of question. So you write very much about elevating music above other art forms.
I know that was controversial.
Controversial, yeah. And sorry to ask you controversial questions. I know you don't like being controversial. You know, you elevated above possibly visual arts and dance and maybe even literature. And sort of being the heretic that I am, I've always sort of had a blind belief in stories and words being sort of so important to humanity and imparting, you know, wisdom and kindness and kind of most importantly empathy. I feel comes with books and language. But now that I know you and I've read your books and I've read whole notes and I've heard you talk about music, I kind of feel that I don't know, you're sort of debunking that myth. You know, music sort of can be elevated above all that. What do you say about that?
Yes, I talk a lot in the book about this physical, visceral ability of music to get into our body. I mean, I guess, you know, I'm also a lover of story. I think a good story can just last for thousands of years and can elevate us and provoke us into thinking. But a beautiful chord goes straight into our body. You know, it gets into our bones. It literally gets into our bones. Those vibrations will come into our ears, fuzzle around in our mind, and go into our heart. And a book, a word will take longer. I mean, like one of my favorite words is kerfuffle. I just think it's such a great word. But there's only a sort of limited reaction you can have to a word time and time again. Whereas I feel with music, and this does happen with story as well, but I feel with music and this different combination of this extraordinary range of essentially 12 semitones for Western classical music and a variety of rhythms that are essentially made up of 4 or 5 different lengths of notes, that with that we can somehow describe the universe in a way that absolutely goes beyond words. I really do think that music, good music begins where words end.
Yeah. And you also talk about sound as being sort of one of the first senses, like in utero, and the last one to go. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I did a lot of research on that, finding out about what happens with babies in utero, and it turns out that I can't remember the week. Do you remember, Sally, being a GP? I can't remember the week in which hearing is developed. Do you know, Charlie? No. But the first note, Charlie's a retired midwife, that's right. The first note that we hear in utero is the first note we learn to play on the recorder, which is so interesting. It's a B. I don't have a perfect pitch, I can't sing a B, but it isn't that. There's somehow, I think there's some connection with those two. I mean, there has to be two such significant times in a person's sensory, you know, hearing experience that it's the same note.
Yeah, it's too much of a coincidence.
Yes.
Yeah. Ed, you've had a really remarkable life already, and you've lived in some really far-flung places, but it all started in Shropshire, England. From reading your books, it seems like there were some difficulties in childhood, there were some challenges. You had you grew up in a single-parent household, and you had the stigma of divorced parents and maybe a tricky sibling or two. So there was some stuff going on, and I feel like your life could have unfolded in a different way if you hadn't been exposed to music quite early on. And you had some really sort of important influences early on there. I wonder if you could tell us about some of them.
Yes, I mean, I guess the most important influence was my mum. You know, she really believed in the power of music, and I was lucky to live in this town, Shrewsbury in Shropshire. It's a town where Charles Darwin spent his childhood. Various people come from Shrewsbury. It's a beautiful town. Has anybody been? Yes, it's a lovely town.
Where the street goes down very steep.
No, there aren't any particularly steep streets, but it's got a very old castle, like a Norman castle from the 1100s, lots of Elizabethan houses. Those sort of houses where you can reach across an alleyway and shake hands with the person on the other side. Not that I've ever done that, but I don't think anybody ever does, but anyway. So my mum was very, very important. She absolutely believed in the power of music and the importance of music. She herself was a violinist. She played until she was 16, when she admits she sold her violin to buy makeup. So that was the end of her musical playing career, but she's always loved listening to music. And so Mum made us all play an instrument, and she encouraged us all. By encouraging, I mean that she came home from her very, very boring civil service job in this provincial town where she worked for social services. And she came home, she cooked dinner, she made sure we all did our homework, and she made us all practice for half an hour. I mean, that's just remarkable, I think. She didn't really have any friends. There was just grandma around. My grandpa died when I was about 7. So Mum led an extraordinarily disciplined, rigorous life, which I think she sort of passed on to all of us in our own way. And then from then, I just had this series of wonderful teachers who continually reached out to see how I could do better. So my first violin teacher, you know, she was lovely, if a little dull. And I was getting sort of a bit bored at around the age of 12. And then this new teacher, Mr. Thirlby, he reached out, said, I've got big hands. Bear in mind, I was still female-bodied at the time. And it's true, these hands would have been enormous on a little girl. So he reached out and said, you've got big hands, why don't you play the viola? And I was immediately promoted into the next orchestra and made a principal viola. That's because I was the only one. And then from there, I just fell in love with the viola. I wanted to play the cello, but this was a sort of halfway mark. You know, this was good enough. And I really loved it. So I started to practice, got better, and in the end, got a place at music college. And from there, you know, the world absolutely opened. I mean, I am here in Australia. I'm here in Brisbane because of music. You know, I met Charlie busking to raise money for the Brisbane floods. If I hadn't had the viola, then that's very unlikely that I'd be sitting here.
I just want to talk a bit more about that early playing of the violin rather than the cello. So you famously were not allowed to play the cello as you wanted to as a child because your mum felt the violins were for girls and cellos were for boys. And as a mum myself who is just, you know, deciding on behalf of my children what instruments they play, it's very daunting to hear that story. And I'm just wondering, you know, I know you eventually found the viola and the cello and now the horn, and you found instruments that speak to you. But yeah, is it that important that you get the right instrument, or can you just is it more just instilling a love of music in children? I think
absolutely, Sally. I mean, you can't do anything wrong. You know, just play your children lots and lots of different music, and follow them. I think that children really do know very, very clearly what instrument they want to play because they respond to the sounds. And if you hear a sound of an instrument, and you know, all these different instruments make such different sounds, don't they? I mean, if you think about a flute compared with a trumpet, or a trumpet compared with a violin, you know, they're all high instruments. So you could be drawn to high instruments, but still within that, those sounds are very, very different. I mean, they literally have a different set of harmonic frequencies, which our body is on a physical level responding to. So I think that children above all know what they want. And so, I know that your third son, Ennis, that we're both, I think we're all secretly hoping, aren't we, Liam, that Ennis is going to play the cello. But, it is tricky to not sort of foist your own wishes upon a child. But I think just simply be open, play them as much different music, expose them to music, come to concerts, and they'll find their way. Yeah.
Okay, there's a few threads leading through your book. One of them is your journey into becoming a music beginner again. You've decided to go back and learn the horn, which I understand is a very challenging instrument. I didn't know that, but I do now. I think you describe it as like walking a tightrope in stilettos over crocodile-infested river. As I read that, I was wondering, when's the last time Ed wore stilettos? So why, Ed, why the horn?
Well, I want this book in general to inspire people at whatever age to start an instrument or to restart an instrument that you maybe played when you were younger. So that was the first thing. And then the second thing was, well, I've got an advantage. I've got 6 years of music college and years in playing in orchestras behind me, so I've got an advantage. But I thought, weaving through the book, it might be a nice sort of journey for me to learn an instrument from scratch and have that as sort of one of the threads going through, as well as this thread of one of my young students, Rosie, who's in her first year of cello lessons. So they're sort of mirroring each other through the book. So I thought I need to give myself a handicap. I can read music, I can pitch music in my head, I understand forms of music. What handicap can I give myself? So that's going to be difficulty. And if you look up the Guinness Book of World Records, the two hardest instruments are the oboe and the horn, otherwise known as the French horn. So no disrespect to oboists, but I didn't really fancy playing the oboe. But I've always loved the horn. So I thought, right, the horn, that's it. So then I had to tell Charlie, which was interesting. She was very calm, very, very calm. It was remarkable.
And I think, Ed, you're going to read us a bit of a passage from the book about starting the horn, and then we might even get to hear a few notes.
So the book is divided into 7 chapters, seven notes in the scale. And in the first chapter, Bravery, I start my horn lessons with this man called Peter Luff. So Peter is a professor at the Con here on South Bank. He is literally one of the world's best horn teachers. I didn't know this at the time. I was told it after a couple of months when Tim Mathers from the Queensland Symphony Orchestra came up to me and said, Ed, you do know that Peter's one of the best horn teachers in the world. Now, that did rather make me feel like I was wasting his time. But anyway, here we go. So this is a little passage from me learning from Peter and my first lesson with him. Peter is waiting for me outside his house. For a man who has spent much of his life mastering the hardest instrument in the world, he looks surprisingly relaxed, twinkly even. I step into his teaching room and see a piece of my new world before me, shiny with a lot of bendy bits. Peter is delightful. I explain I'm learning the horn not only because I've always wanted to, but also to write a book. And he is up for anything. Although underneath the twinkles, I see a seriousness and dedication to the instrument, which is why he has been so successful. Peter picks up the horn he's lending me and immediately pulls a bit off the end. Oh God, he's broken it. Then I see it's the mouthpiece, the bit you can change to suit your own lip shape. He assesses my lips and teeth, British, but not too much, and says I have the perfect mouth for the horn, not too big, not too small. I never realized I was so close to failure right at the start. Okay, put your little finger in your mouth, just the end, and suck on it. I feel I am being initiated into some strange cult. Now, imagine you're spitting a seed out of your mouth. This is not what I had in mind when I decided to play the most magnificent instrument of them all. I do it anyway and spit out a little bit of spit. Embarrassing. Good. Peter goes on to explain how the muscles I am a horn player now, use to create an embouchure or lip shape. The sucking muscles are the first we develop as babies, and they are the ones that keep the corners of the mouth firm. You can try it now. In fact, you can try it now. Stick the end of your little finger in your mouth and suck. There you go. Now you're horn players too. So would you like me to demonstrate a little bit of the horn?
Yeah.
So I was very lucky that my mum, can you hear okay? Okay. I hope you can hear on Zoom. I was very lucky that my mum, I'm the youngest of four, mum gave all of us £2,000. She just had some spare money. I mean, she's not a wealthy woman, but she just had this money sitting in her bank. And so she gave us all £2,000. And so I was able to afford to buy this horn secondhand from one of Peter's students. So it's actually a very good horn and would have cost a lot more new. And this comes from the principal of the West Australian Symphony Orchestra, which is, wonderful. So basically, I'll never have to buy another horn, which is really great. You can see that it's unlacquered, which is said to give a slightly softer sound. It's not just that I've been lazy and haven't polished it. It actually just does look like that. So I talk about the end, pulling off the end. So here we are pulling off the end. So we've all done our sucking and spitting, like that. And then we put our mouthpiece on. And you do that, and that's called buzzing. So you'll see a lot of players doing this to warm up and not be too loud. Like that. Now, the amazing thing about the horn, and what makes it so very difficult, is first of all, it's a conical shape. It's very, very long. I think it's about 6 or 7 meters, I can't remember. If it's all stretched out at its longest length, it's very, very long. Players like Barry Tuckwell would demonstrate and bring a hose pipe onto stage with them, and they'd often play an encore on a hose pipe. So this is basically as long as a hose pipe when you're watering your herbs. So it has all this length, and what you can do is you can change, and this is another reason why it's so difficult, is that you can change the notes just with your mouth and with your diaphragm. I shall attempt to demonstrate. Bear in mind, I have been playing for just over a year, so I'm still pretty basic. So you got your sort of low note. And then just with my mouth and with my diaphragm, I can go up through the harmonic series. So not using any valves at all. And then you change the different notes with all of these things, and with that you get, eventually, once you become a true master of it, you get a range of 4.5 octaves, which is massive. So lower than I play, a lot lower, and really, really high. So that top note I played was an E. My teacher, Peter, can play an octave above that, which is just extraordinary. So the next time you go to a concert and you see the horn, just have a moment of appreciation. This really is a truly very, very difficult instrument. At the top, it's less than millimeters of change in your embouchure to change whole notes. It's so difficult that the conductor, when they're bringing in a horn player for a big solo, the conductor won't look at the horn. They won't give eye contact. They'll just, because they know how hard it is, they'll just simply go like this and leave it to the horn player. It is terrifying but glorious at the same time.
Wow.
Well, thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
Definitely have newfound respect for
Yeah.
horn players.
Yeah.
Like, nothing about that looks easy.
No,
Nothing.
it's
So, Ed, you've been involved in a community group called Brisbane Streams, and as the book unfolds, we meet some of the characters in Brisbane Streams and the founder, Anne, and we get a bit of a feel of what it's like to be a part of a group like that and sort of the family that grows around it. What's it meant to you?
It has been absolutely huge. I've played in some wonderful orchestras. I've played professionally for sort of close to 10 years as a viola player. And never have I felt that sense of community and tightness as there is in Bardon Strings. Catherine, one of my students, is here. She's also in Bardon Strings. Would you agree, Catherine?
Absolutely. I've
Yes.
just started, but it's glorious.
I've really never been amongst people who are so supportive. You know, Charlie and I went to a concert at Queensland Con yesterday, and a couple of chaps called Harry and Jeremy Ward played, and they just turned 21, and they were playing with all their young colleagues, and they were equally supportive. I have to say, when I was at music college, there wasn't quite that vibe. It was pretty competitive. They can be very brutal places, music college. Basically, if you're considered good at your instrument, you're in. If you're considered poor at your instrument, nobody talks to you. And it can be a terribly damaging place. It really can. So coming to Bardon Strings, I have to say, has been a huge way of healing. I really would say that, actually, as a musician, that it's terrible that to have been a professional musician, I have been somewhat damaged by some colleagues, and going to Bardon Strings, I see those injuries just healing up. It's very, very special.
And I understand Bardon Strings is for adult.
Yes.
Adult.
Nobody under 18, sorry.
But people have picked up their instrument again in an
Yes.
adult life. Yeah, I want to talk a bit more about that, Ed. In my other life as a GP, I've had a patient who was 94 and he developed a terrible pneumonia, and then made a miraculous recovery. And he swore to me, he was 94 at the time, swore to me that the reason why he was able to get over this pneumonia was the fact that he'd taken up the clarinet at the age of 92. So he'd been playing it for 2 years, and he swore that it was really wonderful for his lung function. I can't attest to the medical evidence behind that. It's just unbelievable that someone would do that in their 90s. Do you come across many people who are picking up an instrument in later life?
Perhaps not quite in their 90s, but I've had students in their 70s, several in their late 50s, 60s. And look, what I would say is that people learn best when we learn as children, when we put aside all judgment. You know, when you listen to a child play an instrument, they will play and play and play, and they'll make a mistake again and again and again, and they'll do it until they get it right, and then they've got it right, and then they see it, they go, oh, that's it, and then they'll do it again on top of that. And it's rare that an adult allows themselves to do that. An adult will often play, and they'll play a little note, and then they'll immediately recoil and say, oh, that doesn't sound like Yo-Yo Ma, if it's the cello, and then you have to basically, soften the blow that that's going to take a few years, but nevertheless, with simple tunes, they actually can sound like Yo-Yo Ma. But it's allowing yourself to just play and play, practice and practice, and allow that playing of an instrument to sink down lower and lower into your body. Because I think something that we forget about musicians is that what we are doing is a very, very physical thing. It's a physical thing with a lot of mental power as well. So we're like athletes. We're more like athletes than, let's say, scientists. That it's much more physical, I think, than cerebral. And so we have to repeat and repeat. And if an adult can do that, Catherine does that. You do that, don't you, Catherine?
Absolutely, every day.
Yeah, there we go.
Hours.
Yes, and the adults who do that, and there are adults who do that, they're the ones who succeed.
So in contrast to that, one of the other threads that weaves through your book is your little student, Rosie, and you mentioned her already. So she was 7 last year when she took up the cello with you. And she just sounds like a delight, really. The way you write about her, the sort of her energy and her enthusiasm and just her joy in music. And I also feel with those passages when you write about her that there's a real sort of connection between teacher and student. Like you're gaining so much from that relationship as well, and you can see the promise where this is all heading. I wanted to ask you about your own experience with teachers, and we know you've been taught by some pretty amazing people. I think William Pleath and Amadeus Quartet. And who stands out, and who do you remember who you had that sort of amazing relationship with?
Yeah, I think it's the old men from Vienna. England was very, very lucky in the 1930s, 1940s that they had a huge immigration of refugees from Nazi Germany and Nazi Austria. So that's the 3 people from the Amadeus Quartet. Martin Lovett, the cellist, was English born, but the other 3 were all asylum seekers. And in fact, spent some time in Shropshire. There was an immigration camp in Shropshire, a detention centre in Shropshire, which is very, very interesting, yeah. So those old men, there was Ailey Goran, who was the one of the violin professors at the Northern, and Ailey, again, had come from Austria, and he was in his 60s when he was teaching at the Northern, and I was lucky enough in my quartet to have quartet lessons with Ailey Goran. Ailey was the concertmaster of the London Symphony Orchestra. He established the Gabrielli Quartet with William Pleath, who was the teacher of Jacqueline du Pré. So, you know, you're beginning to get a sense of this sort of web of brilliance and deep emotion and joy in the teachers that I had. I mean, they were just spectacular. They never talked about technique, possibly to my detriment, but they did talk so much about metaphor and meaning and the importance of music. And there's one lesson that I will never forget that I wrote about in Cadence with Norbert Breinen, who was the first violin of the Amadeus Quartet. And he was a very, very emotional man, would cry very, very easily. And my quartet studied for a year with them at the Amadeus, the Academy in London. And Norbert Breinen was sitting there, was a very large man, very, very large tummy. And he was like a big teddy bear. And he always wore a blue jumper that was stretched incredibly tight over this tummy. I would look at the knit of this jumper and just wonder in amazement at how well it was made. It managed to kind of maintain its form over this enormous tummy that seemed to grow bigger every week. And my quartet were playing him some Mozart. There's a Mozart quartet in D minor. I think it might be the only quartet in minor key. And it is a wonderful quartet. And it's got its challenges. And anyway, we finished the first movement and Norbert Breinen was crying. And we thought, oh crap, you know, this has been really rubbish. We've made one of the great musicians of the world cry in a bad way. And anyway, we tried to comfort him and he said, you must never forget that music is the most important of all. The doctors heal our bodies, fire service will rescue us, police will save us, but music saves our souls. And I don't want to sort of overstate the importance of music. Of course, all of those services, everything we do, you know, everybody's job is important. But there is something about music that I believe takes us to a different dimension.
And I guess that's has flowed through Ed to your teaching. I'm so lucky that I get to witness this on Saturday afternoons. But Ed's lessons are completely different to the types of lessons I had as a child when I was learning the piano, which were very sort of austere and formalistic and very disciplined, and we would just learn piece for an exam and then piece for an exam. In Ed's lessons, he teaches, he flips over so many different topics. We talk about art, not me, but Lynn and him talk about art and history and you know, there's so much use of language and metaphor. You definitely teach like that. And I have a particular memory of Liam struggling with a phrase and the tapering of the phrase at the end. And rather than just saying, you know, can you taper the phrase, it starts talking about mid-century Scandinavian furniture and the way the leg of a parquet table would, you know, come to a beautiful tapering at the end, and how Liam should be thinking of that when he's doing his phrasing. Or you talk about, you know, precision in 17th century Dutch paintings, and you pull out a painting on his phone and show Liam how, you know, he's precise like this. You know, it's just, there's so much incorporation of different facets of life, and it's remarkable. Yeah.
No, you're making me sound good. I guess you do anything how you want to receive, don't you? Like the best writing advice I ever had was, like, I don't have any qualifications to write. I mean, my English qualification is an O level at 16. I mean, that's it. Like, I haven't done any degree. I don't have a degree. The only qualification I have to write is life and advice that I read in an interview with Jonathan Safran Koa. Somebody else was interviewing. I just read it in the newspaper. That he said, write the book you want to read.
Yeah.
So that's what I try to do. So I would try and give a lesson that I would like to receive myself.
Just got a couple more questions here. You talk about the privilege of learning an instrument, and one that's sort of denied to a lot of people. And you also go into sort of, you give us a day in the life of a state school strings teacher, you know, tuning 30 instruments and teaching the cellos with the violas, with the violins, and it just seems grueling. I'm being controversial again, but can you give us some thoughts on the way the system is structured and the funding that state schools get with their music programs, and whether you think that school music teachers are buckling under the system?
Yes, I mean, it's a very tricky subject, isn't it? Like, do you allow or not allow, but do you provide music services to children and just never mind the sort of, not exactly the quality, but the way it's set up? I mean, obviously these teachers are very, very good teachers, but there's only so much you can do as a teacher. You say you've got 40 minutes and you've got 30 children, and there's 4 strings on an instrument. You've got bows, you've got rosin, you've got tantrums, you've got chairs, music stands, all of that. And you've got technique that needs to be established in those first few years. I mean, I have a few recovery students who have come to me out of the state school system. And to be honest, you know, with some of them, not always, Liam changed very quickly, but we had to do a lot of work with Liam on your bow hold, which you've changed very, very well now. But some students, you know, to be honest, they still haven't really changed. Like, there's still that old way of playing with the hand kind of lean back like that. It's meant to be over like that, but that sort of thing, that really happens. So it's a question of how much do you allow or give a child music, but then maintain quality. And I mean, I'm very, very supportive of as much money being poured into music as poured into sport. And I think that if we have equal music and sport in our lives, with those two sides, and then the so-called central core of English and maths and the sciences in the middle, but those two sides are as supported as the middle, and they're equally supported. I see it very much, and we've seen this in COVID as well, with the COVID response, that sports people have been allowed to travel around. Tens of thousands of people have been allowed to gather in a sports stadium, but what's happened to the concerts? They've all shut down. Yeah. So, I mean, in a kind of dark dystopian future, we have sports people wandering around, but we don't have any musicians, because all the musicians at Liam's age have seen the world that they might be stepping into, and they've gone, stuff that. I'm not going to go into that world. So yes, I absolutely think that, I mean, look, I'm very left-wing in my thoughts, probably shouldn't say them. You didn't hear that on Zoom. But obviously on the ABC, I'm completely non-biased. But I do think that the amount of money that we see some people have, and we see the poverty that some people have to live through no fault of their own, and the amount of difference that music can make, it's one of the great tragedies of modern life. A few years ago, I went to a strings project that was in the west of Sydney. It was around Mount Druitt, but I think it was the next suburb along. And this project was very successful, but it was limited, and it was school children, like little primary school kids in grade 3, I think, who had lessons twice a week as an ensemble in playing string instruments. It was organised by the ACO. And these kids, just like the kids I used to teach in Kabul, they weren't allowed to take their instruments home because their home life was so disrupted, was so dysfunctional, that the teacher didn't want their instrument to be part of that. They wanted to keep their instrument and the music world pure within this haven of the school. And so that's where music was taught. And in fact, the division between home and school was quite stark like that, because they didn't want the carers of the children in the worst scenario to be dismissive of the child's music. So, you know, we have that happening here in Australia. What has happened? I mean, that's beyond a tragedy. I mean, that's a crime.
Yeah, I'm sorry to ask you such a loaded question like that, but I think if you are going to buy into this idea that music just has, you know, innumerable benefits to children, then you've got to give that some consideration, I think, the funding of the school system. Yeah. So just a couple more questions. What I always love about your books is that you, and this one's no different, you always have a list of recommended pieces to listen to, and a bit of a description about each one through the text of the book. And for, you know, a musical novice like me, this is just gold. Like, I love your descriptions of certain pieces, and it allows you to, it directs your listening when you're listening to the piece yourself. I know that listening to a piece is very personal and people respond differently, but sometimes the classical music world can seem like a secret society. I know you argue that it's not, but it can from an outsider's perspective, and you write so in such accessible language that it breaks down those barriers. So with the list at the back of your book, which pieces should we start listening to first? Which are some favourites? Pull some out for us.
Okay, so my absolute favourite, in fact, my go-to piece when I was writing this book, I wrote a lot to this music, was Mercy by Max Richter. You know, his music, so he recomposed the Four Seasons. Some people like it, some people love it. I have to say I love it. And I think it's reinvigorated the Four Seasons itself. It's like contemporary artists doing a reimagining of, you know, very old paintings. I just think it's very, very exciting, his music. Mercy is absolutely gorgeous. Look, you can never go beyond Bach. I think that the first cello suite, you know, that one, that gets a big rap, but I think that the second cello suite, particularly for these times, is a wonderful one. It's in the key of D minor, so it's got a sort of softer resonance than G major, and quite often the way a cellist will play it, or a viola player will play it, they'll play it sort of higher up the instrument as well, so with fewer open strings. So it gives quite a sort of different richness. It's sort of more subtlety. It's almost like a mist, a soft mist has descended over the music. And then another one that I turn to again and again and again, and I still do, is Morten Lauridsen, O Magnum Mysterium. I think, I have to say, I think, Charlie, if I die before you, you have to organise a choir to sing that at my funeral. Thank you very much.
All right, we're going to end with some rapid fire questions, Ed. All right. So, which piece did you vote for in this year's Classic Countdown, Ed?
What was the subject again?
Done so many, haven't you?
Yeah,
That's showing your age. The piece that you couldn't live without.
Oh, I actually can't remember. Oh no, I remember. It was viola concertos. Yeah, it was the Bartok viola concerto. A wasted vote. Never got onto the list. And the Telemann. I voted. It was like all equal.
Oh, okay, yeah. What's your favourite thing to do on a lazy Sunday afternoon?
Watch the telly. I know that's really boring, but look, watching the telly, it's great. Drink whiskey. What could be nicer? Yeah, we watch telly in the afternoons. Okay, I watch telly in the afternoons. Charlie is very busy at work doing other things. If it's a rainy afternoon.
Okay, yeah, we'll make it rainy.
Okay, a rainy, lazy afternoon.
Best concert you've ever been to?
Oh, good one. I immediately comes to mind is Burt Bacharach with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra back in, when would this have been, 2008, 9, something like that. I arrived late and they'd run out of tickets, although I'd got a ticket. And so they made special space for me right at the front. I was sitting right in front of Burt Bacharach. He was as close to me as Mary is to me now. And I was enthralled from beginning to end. They had Bert playing the piano. They had their own band, 2 of his singers who come from America, and then the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra strings and other instruments. But the core sound was Bert's own band. And I think for the whole concert, I was just like this. It was absolutely thrilling. The way these Americans, you know, those Broadway singers, they punch it out in a way that other singers just don't. And it is so exciting. It was just amazing.
Good answer. All right, this is Liam's. What's your favourite composer's wig? Sorry.
Well, definitely Handel.
Yeah, okay.
He had the really big, luscious one.
Favourite or Bach cellist? Well, you've already told us that.
Yeah.
Second, yeah. Favourite Beethoven symphony?
Number 6.
Yeah. And your favourite instrument that you don't yet play?
Oh, good question. Oh, that's a really, really good question.
Charlie's on the edge of a seat here thinking, what's happening?
No, I'm not going to learn another instrument. I'm really not. Look, I love it in orchestras when the timpani player is really, really good. I think a good timpani player can make a concert, and they can slightly distract if they're not really, you know, pushing it. So I think timpani.
There you go. Nothing too controversial there. Unless you're going to take up the
I
timpani.
won't be taking it.
All right, well, thanks, Ed. Thanks so much for telling us all about your book. I think we've got time for questions.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do. Are there any?
I'd just like to say a big thank you to you, Sally. This is Sally's first book. Absolutely. Thank you, Sally. Thank you so much.
An absolutely amazing conversation, actually. So I can't believe that you didn't think you could do this. It was amazing. It was amazing. Anybody got any questions from in the room here?
So were you not with the ABC when you met Charlie and you were busking?
No, I was. I'd moved up to Sydney, so this was back in 2011. And
listening to you forever.
yeah, so I moved up to Sydney, and then the Brisbane floods happened, so I was busking in Sydney to raise money for here. And Charlie was visiting her sister down in Sydney.
Have you been on the ABC since?
Since 2003?
Yes.
Yeah, a long time.
Amazing. Any other questions from the audience here?
Really nothing?
Nothing.
I
Yes.
was curious about the thing about the child in utero. How do we know that the child listens to a particular note?
First of all, they hear the at about 18 weeks, I have a look. They're obviously hearing their mother's heartbeat, the aortic sounds, etc. And it says by 27, 28 weeks, they hear sounds outside their mother's uterus.
Because the fetus is responding.
Yes.
I'm guessing that there have been tests done.
Yes.
Yeah,
Because
it was like a whole scientific thing that I did look up. It wasn't just some Wikipedia thing on the internet.
I just did the Wikipedia.
Any other questions?
Have you had any communication with the music students that you had in Afghanistan?
Yes, some. Unfortunately, because the way I left the school, it was quite controversial with Dr. Sarmas, which is, you know, one of the great sadnesses of being transgender, that you end up hurting people because you need to transition, and it's not always in the easiest way. But the students that I did remain in contact with, they've managed to leave. And one of my favourite students is now, in fact, my 2 favourite students, they're both now in the States on scholarships and studying. And I just hope they never have to go back.
were you frightened when you were there?
Not really. I think adrenaline just sort of kicked in until I was basically just adrenalized, if there is such a word, just pretty much for the whole year. I drank far too much in that year. I smoked, didn't eat enough. I was very, very thin. I was as thin as Sally, and that's not actually an exaggeration. I was very, very thin when I was there. I think I was just so stressed. Not to say that you were thin because you're stressed. You're very healthy. But now, you know, being back here in Brisbane, I've managed to relax a little bit and put on about 15 kilos, but that's much nicer for me, that's for sure. But look, I was just very, very, very stressed the whole time. But I think that you just it becomes your normal. Yeah.
There was a question.
Yeah, Catherine.
Yeah, I'm halfway through Cadence, and I'm just blown away with not how little I know, because I confront that frequently, but your knowledge of music and what I'm learning from the music. And I'm wondering about the degree of research that you do. Of how much in terms of the music do you need to research? I mean, other things about, what babies, hearing utero and that sort of thing. I guess there's that element of research too.
Well, I think in whole notes, I think I write a little differently about music. One of the feedbacks, or some of the feedback I received from Cadence, was that a lot of people skipped over the music stuff, like the technical music stuff, that they just found it not interesting or too complex, and so they just wanted to get onto the story bit. And so I took that in, I registered that. And so my writing about music in whole notes is a little different. It's less technical. I think it's more emotional. It's more story-led. It's more feeling based. Yeah. So it's basically, I guess it's based on my own responses to music, and then looking at the stories behind different pieces as well. Like there's the chanson triste that I write about. One of my students is learning it. The end of book 4, chanson triste. So I write the story about the chanson triste, and so sort of come at the music in that sort of way rather than in a music theory kind of way.
Yes.
Ed, I've plucking up the courage to write a letter that might go something like this. I've been wanting to play the cello for years. How does one go about finding a good teacher when it's a
Look, I'll tell you what the advice that I gave to a few people at Brisbane Streams who were looking for a new cello teacher. Go to the con.
Okay.
In fact, there's a teacher there called Francesca. She's doing a postgrad at the con. She teaches, I think, 4 people now at Brisbane Streams, and she's fantastic. And I think that mix of, not that you're at all old, but Francesca's in her early 20s, and so that slight sort of mix of generations, I think, is incredibly useful, and it just gives everyone so much. Francesca loves her older students. They love Francesca because she's like their child, or even like their grandchild, and it's really, really beautiful to see. So I would strongly advise to go to the con. Yeah.
Any final question from the audience?
I'd like to know a bit about the Brisbane Streams. Is it to do with Brisbane?
Yeah, so it's Anne Keenan is a teacher here in Brisbane who was based out of Bardon. So it used to rehearse in Bardon. It now rehearses in Paddington. But it was set up 5 years ago and started with a tiny little group of people in Anne's living room in Bardon, and then very quickly got bigger and bigger as teachers heard about it and sent their adult students there. And so we rehearse once a week, give concerts about 3 or 4 times a year.
Oh, and where do you have the concerts?
Well, we're currently doing a tour of the rotundas of Brisbane, which is successful depending on whether the rotunda's booked or whether somebody's got there from a birthday party before us, or whether it's raining. But we make a wonderful sound. It's an uninhibited sound. It's spectacular, I would say.
Wonderful. Look, I think Puppy is telling us that our hour is up. We maybe we'll hold Puppy up for the people on Zoom.
There we go. There's Puppy up there.
Oh.
Do you want to say something? No,
No.
she's shy.
We absolutely love a dog here in the shop. You cannot bring a dog past the shop without coming in and getting a cuddle, unfortunately. So we're very happy to have one. Our first puppy on a Zoom event. So that's fantastic.
That's really good.
Look, it's been really lovely to be able to finalise these festival of Ed Ayres, I think it is now, with these two events that we've had, and now with the successful Zoom event as well.
Yeah.
So it's been really fantastic to host you, Ed.
Thank you
And
so much.
Thanks so much, Sally, for
Yes,
doing such
go
a
Sally.
great job. Oh my God, you and Al.
Yeah.
do all of it.
Yeah, good.
Look, it's been really great to have you here tonight. We are going to go to the signing, which we can do in the shop tonight, which is very exciting because we're allowed back in with this amount of people as well. So we have a table set up at the front of the shop. The books are for sale at the counter. Feel free to come in, grab a book and get it signed